So, imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, check your phone and see a breaking headline. Russia and NATO are now friends. Sounds wild, right? After decades of rivalry, proxy wars and global tension, Russia and NATO countries suddenly decide to be buddies. But wait, what would that even mean? Would NATO become irrelevant? Would our world become safer? And how would it reshape our daily lives? Let's unpack how a friendship between Russia and the West could completely transform our world. And trust me, the answer might surprise you. For decades, tensions between Russia and the West have shaped international relations, from the Cold War to today's rivalries. If suddenly Moscow and Western capitals started sending friendship bracelets instead of threats, the whole game changes. The familiar East-West divide would fade. Instead of competing blocs, you'd have a massive coalition from North America through Europe all the way to Russia. Think of the influence this mega-friend group would wield in the United Nations and on issues like nuclear disarmament or climate change. With Russia on board, the UN Security Council could actually agree more often instead of deadlocking over East-West splits.
Putin, Vladimir Putin, 17 years of the most powerful.
With Russia and the West, global focus might shift to other issues, perhaps tackling terrorism, pandemics, or climate change together. After all, if nobody's preparing for World War III, we have more time and money for other problems. We might even see joint missions to space or coordinating on tech innovations instead of cyber showdowns. Of course, one big player left out of this friendship circle is China. Right now, Russia leans heavily toward China because of bad blood with the West. In fact, just before the Ukraine war in 2022, Moscow and Beijing declared a limitless friendship. But if Russia flips to Team West, China suddenly loses its strategic partner. China could feel isolated, which might push Beijing to either seek its own new friends or who knows. Quick reality check. Is this totally unprecedented? Actually, no. There was a moment right after World War II when the US and Soviet Union cooperated. They were allies against Nazi Germany. In July 1975, American astronaut Thomas Stafford and Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov share a historic handshake in orbit in 1975 during the Apollo-Soyuz mission. This moment showed that even at the height of the Cold War, cooperation was possible. So, a Russia-West friendship isn't impossible to imagine. History shows flashes of cooperation. But if it happened thoroughly today, the geopolitical landscape would be almost unrecognizable.
To maintain friendly relations and economic cooperation with one another, to consult together whenever the territory or independence of any of them is threatened, and to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked.
NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aka the Western Military Alliance originally formed to oppose the Soviet Union. If Russia becomes a friend or even a partner, what happens to NATO and other military pacts? NATO's first Secretary General famously said the alliance's goal was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Well, if Russia is now in, as a friend at least, that 70-year-old mission statement goes out the window. NATO would have to reinvent itself. Does it transform into a broader peace alliance including Russia? Could Russia actually join NATO formally? In this rosy scenario, perhaps yes, though both sides would have to jump through hoops. Fun fact, after the Cold War, some Western leaders did toy with this idea. Bill Clinton later claimed he kept NATO's door open for Russia and even discussed it with Boris Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin. So it's not a totally new concept. If it happened now, Russia joining NATO would mean one less major military rivalry in the world. Imagine Russian and NATO troops doing joint exercises instead of staring each other down across borders. Russia leads its own mini-NATO called the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, with a few ex-Soviet countries. If Russia is tight with NATO, the CSTO might merge with or fall under the NATO umbrella, or simply become irrelevant. Meanwhile, countries like Ukraine and Georgia, whose potential NATO membership was a huge sore point for Moscow, suddenly wouldn't be contentious. Russia being friendly could even open the door for a security arrangement that includes everyone. A friendly Russia-West means the massive military resources on both sides are now aligned. On the flip side, without the need to deter each other, defense spending could be reduced across the board. A classic peace dividend. Less money on tanks, more on tech and schools. Currently, Russia faces heavy economic sanctions from the US, EU and others, especially due to conflicts like the Ukraine war. If peace and friendship broke out, those sanctions would likely be lifted in favor of trade deals. Western businesses would rush back into Russia's market, and Russian companies could do business freely in the West. Energy trade would boom. Europe once relied on Russia's natural gas heavily, and in a friendship scenario, pipelines would be pumping at full capacity again, but this time with no political strings attached. We might see Russian industries partnering with Western firms to build better infrastructure, manufacture goods, and develop new tech. In theory, everyone gets richer. Trade grows, investment flows, and consumers on both sides have more choices.
Aside from a short-term rebound, the Russian market has proven to be much more riskier and much less attractive than we thought it would be like 2-3 years ago. For a simple reason is that when you have a country breaking international laws or acting this way with clearly, I would say, a kind of autocratic government, you also fear for the private investors, the protection of foreign investors.
Russia would need to address issues that long scared off some investors, things like transparency, corruption, and rule of law, to truly maximize this economic bonanza. And Western economies would have to be careful too. Suddenly flooding markets with cheaper Russian commodities, oil, gas, metals, could disrupt some industries. With reduced military tensions, governments could redirect billions from defense budgets to economic development and social programs. Remember that term, peace dividend? It basically means cashing in on peace. Like how after 1991, many countries cut defense spending sharply and enjoyed more domestic prosperity. We could see a similar effect. For the US, Russia has been the big bad adversary, or at least a rival, for so long that a sudden friendship might feel suspicious at first. Is this for real? Initially, Washington might be cautious. Trust but verify, as Reagan famously said. But if the detente is genuine, the US stands to benefit a lot. American businesses would cheer the opening of Russia's market. And strategically, the US could reposition resources, perhaps focusing more on the Pacific Asia and the rising challenge of China, now that Europe is fixed. There might be internal divides though. Some hawks would worry it's a trick, while others say we should embrace the chance. The EU as a whole would likely welcome Russia economically, maybe even talk about new trade agreements or visa-free travel in the long run. Politically, the EU has always championed democracy and human rights, so a real friendship might require Russia to make progress on those fronts. Within NATO, which includes the US, Canada, Turkey, and most of Europe, reactions could vary. Countries like Germany and France often kept channels open with Russia and might enthusiastically lead the reconciliation. Germany, for instance, had strong business ties with Russia pre-Ukraine war. UK and Eastern Europe might be a bit tougher. The UK has been very firm against Russian misbehavior in recent years, and Poland Baltics have vivid memories of Soviet domination, so they'd need concrete reassurances that this new friendship is real and lasting. Expect a lot of diplomatic visits, cultural exchanges, and confidence-building measures to solidify trust. Let's not forget the people. Western public opinion toward Russia soured after events like Crimea in 2014 and the Ukraine invasion 2022. Russian public opinion of the West also dropped amid propaganda and sanctions. Turning that ship around might take time. Over time, younger generations might find it totally normal that Russians, Americans, and Europeans cooperate closely, even if older folks who lived through the Cold War or recent crises might pinch themselves at the new reality. Is this scenario totally outlandish? Well, history shows Russia and the old Soviet Union has cooperated with the West at crucial moments. Let's hit rewind for a minute. The United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union were forced into friendship by a common enemy, Nazi Germany. It was an uneasy alliance ideologically, but it worked. Without it, defeating Hitler would have been much harder. In April 1945, as victory neared, American and Soviet troops famously met at the Elbe River in Germany. Russia shared intelligence and helped the US-led war in Afghanistan, at least initially, by offering transit routes. They've also cooperated in diplomacy at times, like the Iran nuclear deal talks, where Russia's involvement was key to reaching an agreement with Iran. And let's not forget space. Beyond Apollo-Soyuz, the International Space Station, ISS, has been a joint effort since the 1990s with Americans, Russians, Europeans, and others, literally living together in orbit for decades. Now, before we start singing Kumbaya in Russian and English, let's address the elephant in the room. What could go wrong? Even if Russia and the West became friends, there are some risks and downsides to consider. This new friendship would have some serious trust issues to work through. Decades of rivalry don't vanish overnight. A small disagreement could reopen old wounds. For example, recall that in the late 2000s, initial post-Cold War warmth turned into new tensions, grievances over NATO expansion, the 2008 Georgia War, and especially 2014's Ukraine crisis shattered a lot of goodwill. That history means any new friendship is going to require constant nurturing. Inside Russia, hardliners and nationalists might oppose coziness with the West, fearing it undermines Russia's sovereignty or traditional values. In Western countries, politicians who built their careers on opposing the Kremlin might resist suddenly treating it as a partner. Earlier, we saw how China might feel isolated. That in itself could be a downside. A cornered China could become more aggressive or double down on anti-Western alignment. Now, I want to know what you think. Is a Russia-West grand friendship a recipe for world peace and prosperity, or are we just dreaming? Let's chat in the comments. Do you see any other benefits or risks we missed? And would you sleep easier in this world or worry about what's next?